So if we look at what print to web used to mean, early on it was that designers were like, okay, I need to design websites, so what do I need to know how to do that? They kind of figured out the limitations, the screen sizes, and the fonts they could use and that kind of thing. And they started designing websites. So there was sort of this sort of abracadabra or aha moment where designers were sort of approved to now be web designers, and they could check that off and they could put on their resume that they're also a web designer. And this reflected the process at the time where graphic designers or designers of some type would design an interface or a website, hand it off to a web guy like me that could then go program it, and presto, out pops a website. This was our process early on, and it, I suppose, worked okay. But the times they are a changing, right? Nowadays, I like to say it takes more of a village. And of course, graphic designers play a role. They have some valuable skills that are still quite applicable to the web world. But in reality, there's a whole host of other people and other skill sets that play a role. And this isn't even all the possibilities, but things like UI, UX designers, front end, back end developers, information architects, and so on. So there's all kinds of different sort of perspectives on building websites. There's different components, different people play different roles. And I think that really reflects the change in the industry. Now, designers, you can kind of understand from looking at this even why graphic designers are being asked to take on some other roles like UI, UX, and even some of that front end development. It's because there are so many buckets that need to be filled here that we start asking one person to take on multiple roles, especially in smaller organizations, right? The larger the organization, the more specialized these skills become. For example, information architecture. You're not going to have an information architect in a tiny three-man studio. One of the people in the studio is going to be asked to do that role, right? At the end of the day, it does take a village to build a website, and fundamentally, there's a lot of roles to be filled. If this feels somewhat overwhelming, um, it kind of is, right? There's a lot to sort of know, to get to know. But what I find exciting is that as you dive into this, if you keep one thing in mind, you will be good to go. And so, as we talk about the idea of user experience, I can't help but ponder what that even means, right? Like, we first need to define sort of what is user experience. And if you were to ask someone, say a friend went to a concert, and you ask them, hey, what was the concert like? What was your experience, right? You may not say those words, but in essence, that's what you're asking. They might say things like, oh, it was fun, it was cool, it was loud, it was energetic, it was exciting. They would express all of these sort of descriptions of their emotions. And at the heart of things, user experience is the emotional response people have to something. And you typically want your response to be positive, right? You don't want to build an application that's frustrating. You want to build an application that's fun or easy to use or feels safe to use, that it's easy to learn, all these sorts of things, right? And so that fundamentally is the idea of user experience. So user experience design would then be trying to design things such that they produce a positive experience, a positive emotional response. If I were to say to you, I'm a magazine designer, you'd know what I go design. I make magazines. But if I say I'm an experience designer, well, that's not quite so tangible, right? There's nothing really to latch onto for that. And that's where the whole idea of the user centered design process comes from, right? When I say user centered design, this is actually a process that has users at the very center of things in terms of a design process, right? And this is one way to implement user experience design. So if I'm a user experience designer, I could use the user-centered design process to then go implement interfaces with a good user experience. Okay, so this is the means that we use to get to a good user experience.